Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, dear participants around the world, dear colleagues and friends. I'm particularly delighted to have the opportunity to share this impressive panel with my special gratitude and thanks to the Policy Center New South, the team, the executive president Ainawi, and then my esteemed colleague and friend Professor Rashid, and for especially the commitment to the security and peace pillar, more particularly in Africa. This fifth edition of the African Peace and Security Annual Conference is bringing us together a very timely theme, under the women, peace, and security in Africa. It's going to be addressing the role and place of women in conflict prevention and resolution. This is a very sensitive field that has breakthrough ground results when correctly approached. It will try to raise some of the challenges and opportunities that women are facing in this particular field. Also, looking at women participation in mediation and reconciliation. You know, we've had, I come from the United Nations systems, we've had some specialized literature that has argued that if we have not been able to achieve the results we want in terms of mediation in conflicts, sometimes in post-conflict setting, it's because either we lack female mediators, not because they're not there, but they're not brought to decision-making processes, or because this gender dimension, you know, the women participation in those very sensitive talks that pre-configure the life of post-conflict, of conflict country from there and onwards, are not adequately taken into perspectives. And this also relay the interests to how do we ensure that this women leadership is there, either in mediation roles or in participant roles or in engagement roles, and how can they be better probably in decision-making processes. With this also, we'll probably look into how, you know, gender-sensitive approaches can be applied to, in general, to the African security sectors, and how women can contribute to the culture of peace, to the trust between population and their security and justice institutions. Maybe a special light will be given on how the WPS agenda is relevant, is at the junction with the prevention and sustaining peace agendas. How can they cross-fertilize to give us the best delivery results? With this in mind, let me keep it a bit short to give the floor to the impressive panel I have the chance and the opportunity to sit with this for this particular thematic. I will introduce them the moment they will get the floor. And let me begin with the first, Dr. Mamphela, Ramphele, who is a celebrated career as an activist, as a medical doctor, as an academic, as a businesswoman, and as a political thought leader. She co-founded, like you would know, probably the Black Consciousness movement in South Africa, very tough times, and Reimagine South Africa. She's also the co-president of the Club of Rome. Dr. Mamphela will question the dynamics of social transformation, in particular arena of gender equality and equity. She probably will also explore how to secure the transformative processes needed with sound proposals on women's role in conflict prevention and restitution. With this, Dr. Mamphela, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, and thank you to all the participants and my fellow panelists. I have chosen to be provocative about the assumptions that we can somehow bolster the role of women in conflict prevention and resolution in an untransformed social environment. Conflicts, in my view, are indicators of social fractures. The multiple challenges we face in securing sustained social transformation that we would love to see is because we focus a lot on developing knowledge about what needs to be done and too little on the emotional side of social relationships. Securing transformative relationships we desire between men and women requires complex mindset changes for us to accept letting go of traditions and customs that undermine healing of the social fractures. I'm in a society in South Africa which has gender equality absolutely at the core of our human rights constitution. And yet, we still have gender-based violence within the military, not just outside. And so I think mindset change is really an area in conflict resolution and prevention that is often neglected. I would like to suggest that the proposition that bolstering women's roles in conflict prevention and resolution would somehow, whether it's through empowerment or through many other policy changes that we can bring about, I doubt if that alone would be adequate without the radical changes in power relationships that are critical to society at all levels, at the global level, national level, and even in the home base. Conflicts around the globe are initiated and wars are waged predominantly by men. Even the most empowered women and courageous activists find it very difficult to make the breakthrough unless there is a partnership between those who tend to wage war and those who are peacemakers. Conflicts across the globe, in my view, are fueled by understandings of power relationships that are based on the notion of power as a zero-sum game. I come from a continent which has gone through colonial conquest and decolonization, and yet all of the wounds, the scars of a divided Africa continue to erupt into fierce wars because we have not spent as much time and energy on preparing the social environment for peace building and for resolution and prevention of conflicts. And I believe what women can contribute to this process is in them coming with their full feminine characteristics that we know from nature that women are the bearers and the keepers of the seed. And so their characteristics for empathy, for collaboration, for caring, for sharing, helps in the process of being able to take a long-term view of what is of value. The short-termism that drives conflicts can only be, in my view, counteracted by bringing this feminine aspect that even men have, but they undermine because of the socialization that we have. So the multiple planetary emergencies that we face in our globe today, I believe in the same way that we're talking about conflicts at a local level, at the global level, we also have conflicts which are driven by a notion of socioeconomic and political system that talks about winner takes all. So I believe that women as mothers, as bearers and keepers of the peace, have a great role to play to promote the socialization of boys and girls, young men and women, and leaders across all levels of society to reimagine gender relationship in all their complexities. The reimagination would help enable the development of an abundance mindset that could prevent conflict and help resolve conflict, because we are not believing that this is so scarce that I have to kill my brother in order to get the resources I need. I believe a world free of conflict is possible, but it requires a reimagination of ourselves as a human species with an Ubuntu value system. Mother Earth has all we need to sustain life, provided we act in recognition of our interdependence and interconnectedness. Such a reimagination would enable a world that would prioritize the building of conflict prevention characteristics in people, in their relationships, the resolution of conflicts that arise, and the restitution process to promote well-being for all in a healthier planet. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Mamphela. Thank you for the precious insights, and most particularly for the challenges that you've raised, despite coming from an environment where human rights are really upfront. Not only the challenges in relation to the lack of taking gender perspectives mainstreamed in an adequate manner, but also partially of all the perception of the power as a zero-sum game. And thank you also for the multiple recommendations that you have envisioned, and all the comparative advantages that would give to a gender-sensitive approach more impact on our collective delivery. With this said, let me give the floor to Federico Borello, who is an executive director of the Center for Civilians in Conflicts, a center that envisions a world that no harm will be conflicted to civilians, a very noble endeavor indeed. And he will be addressing the active role of women in protection issues, bringing some examples from the field across several conflicts into perspectives. With this, Federico, the floor is yours, please.
Thank you very much. And thank you for the invitation to the Policy Center for the New South to this event. I have the ungrateful task of coming after Dr. Mamphela, but I'll do my best here. So as you said, my name is Federico Borello, and the Executive Director of Center for Civilians in Conflict, and we work on the protection of civilians caught in conflict zones. We work with conflict-affected communities, armed actors, governments, and multilateral institutions around the world, including places such as Afghanistan, Iraq, Nigeria, Yemen, Ukraine, South Sudan, Congo, Sahel, and the region of East Africa. At CIVIC, we recognize that civilian women, men, boys, and girls experience conflict differently, and therefore have different and unique protection concerns. And in order to provide effective protection of civilians, We must understand these different needs and develop transformative approaches to address them. We are all well aware of Resolution 1325, and which most importantly to me stressed the importance of women's equal and full participation as active agents in peace and security. Resolution 1325 has a protection pillar, which highlights the protection needs of women and girls in armed conflict. This pillar is obviously tied to the UN's protection of civilians agenda, although there is a need for the two agendas to be better applied and coordinated together in practice. Protection approaches within the WPS agenda have focused primarily on protection from conflict-related sexual violence. And while this is, of course, one of the main scourges of the world of today, other threats and vulnerabilities to women civilians outside of sexual violence are often under-addressed. Likewise, efforts towards enhancing the protection of civilians should recognize that conflict affecting civilian men and women can also be agents of their own protection and should play an active part in developing protection strategies. I will highlight here 3 of the tools and approaches that we use at Civic to better promote and recognize the participation of women in conflict resolution and in civilian protection. The first is our approach to the community-based protection. Harm endured by civilians in conflict often fuels vicious cycles of grievances and violence. Our work on community-based protection is an approach that recognizes the inherent expertise and agency of civilians in conflict and the need of developing protection activities together with these civilians. We set up and facilitate community protection work groups, we call CPGs, to create spaces for dialogue within a community to discuss solutions, make communities aware of their rights, and translate those rights into concrete recommendations for governments and armed actors. And then we facilitate meetings between communities and governments and armed actors. Civic aims to help communities assess protection issues impartially and looking at all the determinants of these issues, whether they are ethnicity, religion, age, class, or gender. As such, one aspect, important aspect of our groups is the selection, process, and composition of members. We regularly emphasize the importance of including women as members to raise and address issues that specifically affect women. When relevant, we also conduct all-women community protection group sessions to allow women to speak about protection concerns freely, which they may not otherwise feel comfortable raising in public or in groups that included men. And we have seen that firsthand in some groups, meetings that we had in Nigeria and Afghanistan, where women then expressed the need to have only women sessions. This group has accomplished results. For example, 2 different districts in Afghanistan, these CPGs successfully advocated with the Taliban to allow girls to attend schools. Also in Afghanistan, one women's rights activist, Masouda, was leading a district women council, a space for women to discuss safely their concerns and priorities, when the Taliban warned her to shut it down, claiming these gatherings were against Islamic law. Masouda reached out to the local CPG, and the group mobilized respected elders, Islamic scholars, and other community groups. Accompanied by these leaders, Masouda personally met with the local Taliban commander and convinced him that the Women Council are in alignment with Islamic law and that women should be able to go to these sessions to discuss their problems with other women. And shortly thereafter, the Women Council resumed. In Northeast Nigeria, in Borno State, on the other hand, our CPG advocated with the military concerning the sexual exploitations of girls in IDP camps by security forces, something that was raised by Dr. Mamphela, the sexual abuses within the military. And this led the commander to withdraw the forces from within the camps. And also in Nigeria, CPGs successfully convinced security forces to provide patrols for civilians who had been threatened and assaulted by armed groups to collect firewood, to go to their farming fields, and to go to the market. The second topic I would like to briefly highlight is women and UN peacekeeping. There is a great need for women in peacekeeping operations, and Civic has undertaken extensive research on peacekeeping operations in CAR, DRC, Mali, and South Sudan. Our research has demonstrated that having women peacekeepers deployed alongside their male counterparts can help missions better access and engage women in the communities they are deployed to protect. There are important initiatives to increase the deployment of women to peacekeeping operations that need to be supported. In 2020, out of 95,000 UN peacekeepers worldwide, only 5% of military contingent staff were women, and only 11% within police units were women. I encourage people to look at the ELSI Initiative Fund for Uniformed Women in Peace Operations to support and incentivize the increased meaningful participation of uniformed women in UN peace operations. This is a voluntary UN and member state initiative with a multi-donor trust fund to facilitate the access of women to UN peacekeeping operations. However, more women doesn't necessarily translate into more gender-sensitive mandate implementation. We conducted extensive research on the role of UN peacekeeping missions on conflict-related sexual violence, and found that both men and women peacekeepers need to be better trained on these issues, and that a number of other steps need to be taken, such as the need to include gender expertise among the criteria for senior mission leadership hiring and evaluations. The third and last issue, which is parallel to the issue of women in peacekeeping, is the issue of women in armed forces. At Civic, we believe that security actors have both a responsibility and an interest to prevent and address civilian harm during conflict. While most of our engagement with armed actors necessarily target men, for example, the training of male-dominated armed forces in the protection of civilians, a gender-sensitive lens needs to be applied to all these activities. For example, we include gender issues in our training scenarios. I have to give credit to a local Ugandan NGO, Raising Voices, that developed a training called In Her Shoes that helps soldiers put themselves in the shoes of civilians and look at the lack of choices and remedies that civilians have. Civic has adapted this training to our work in Nigeria. And through these trainings, we have soldiers play the role of female civilians affected by conflict. Soldiers are presented with scenarios that force them to contend with the real life protection issues and choices women civilians face. For example, how a soldier may interact with a female civilian at a checkpoint, or how a woman in an IDP camp is forced by circumstances to trade sex for food and medicine. Trainees consistently cite these exercises as some of the most transformative training approaches. On the other hand, in Iraq, our research has highlighted the critical role that women can play when they are members of the security forces. For example, by interviewing and searching women at checkpoints, or gathering critical information about the security concerns of women in the country. Despite their importance to operational effectiveness, women throughout the world face many barriers to their effective inclusion in the security forces, such as sometimes very practical things like a lack of appropriately sized uniforms and boots, lack of separate facilities for them at training sites, but also harassment and societal stigma against their participation in operational security forces role, and discrimination in hiring processes. Civic research has helped to identify these challenges and recommendations for how Iraqi authorities can continue to address them, and these lessons can be learned and used by security forces in other countries. In conclusion, these are just some of the very practical ways in which we can operationalize the WPS agenda on the ground and include and strengthen women's participation within communities UN peacekeeping operation and security forces. Thank you very much.
Federico, the protection role and mandates have come the last 2 decades to be at the heart of the international community in a role of support to protecting vulnerable communities, especially in conflict-affected areas. In the United Nations, for example, protection mandates have become to be really the yardstick by which the deployment, the action on the ground is evaluated and assessed. I have, really appreciated the community-based approach of the Civic Center and how it has enabled women to voice their needs to be taken into consideration while designing the civilian strategy engagement. I have also noticed, the rich experiences throughout the world, be it in northern Nigeria, in Iraq, or elsewhere. The point in Nigeria was of particular concern. I mean, protection from armed forces is certainly a very delicate task, and it's one of the most obvious challenges because by the end of the day, protection remains the primary responsibility of the governments. And when such is not the case, then yes, I would imagine that action of the international community through NGOs or through mandates will be will make an impact positively. I've also seen the practical examples that you have raised on gender-sensitive lens in engagements, in training, and other aspects, the scenario playing, the role playing. This is very practical, and I can see the value of the impact on these communities. And you're really, really right to point in your Iraqi example that it's, the gender sensitive is not just a matter of numbers. We're not just looking for parity and so on, but the usefulness of those female law enforcement or peacekeepers in really some of those tasks like the search, cordon search, or the house search, or somewhere where you wouldn't do it if you don't have a women participation in past in those forums. So it goes beyond the number. It's really the operational usefulness and the role modeling that goes into the heart of the protection ability. With this, thank you, Federico, and we'll pass the floor to Erica, who's an engagement advisor to the NATO hub for South. She supported and implemented with a number of stakeholders in Africa and Middle East. As a lieutenant colonel of the Italian Army Reserve, she's been deployed as a women empowerment advisor, including in Libya, West Afghanistan. And she will be today sharing lessons learned from her experiences that are of interest to our discussions. With this, Erica, please, the floor is yours.
Good afternoon, all. Thank you. I'm truly honored to be here representing the Hub for South, although speaking on personal capacities and not on behalf of NATO. It's also a pleasure for me to bring you the greetings from my director, the South Hub Director, General Davide Re. My contribution will focus particularly on the women contribution to the culture of peace. And I will start with a sentence that Ambassador Saad Shalabi, one of the co-founders of the FemWise Network, told me once after a study day. I'm engagement advisor. And what does it mean? She told me, Erica, you are not only engaging, through engaging, you are building bridges between the hub and Africa. It means that you are building peace. It seems to be a very simple sentence, but in reality, precisely because I've been told by such a great woman as Saad Shalabi is, it contains a deep meaning of my work, which is in reality building bridges with Africa and Middle East, and particularly with women. I'm an action woman, let's say action girl. As you said, I've been deployed in operational theater as an officer to the Italian Army, part of the reserve. And I like working, let's say, in concrete. And in this, during our conversation, I would like to speak about my experience with the network FemWise. I met this network, let's say, this huge network that include almost 400 African about 3 years ago. And we organized together Patra in Naples, where I'm deployed African women from all over the continent. It's stronger, the relationship between the NATO hub and African Union FemWise, but also highlighted areas of common interest, such as fighting against terrorism, radicalization, and gender roles in radicalization, and the role of women in preventing radicalization. It has been a fantastic event, 5 days of workshop, conversation, and engaging and knowing each other. I just would like to mention a couple of names of the workshop, because I think it's important. First, Betty Bigombe was one of the participants. She's a champion in mediation, is a woman from Uganda, currently providing her support to the peace process in South Sudan, and for women, peace and security, courageous her job. In an online workshop, but I'm 100% see that a lot of good things can happen. And to have such a great woman as a model is important, because it's important for the youngest generation having a model. While I was wearing uniform in Afghanistan, I felt very proud, and I felt a great responsibility, just because I was wearing a uniform, and I knew that I was like a sort of model for other young women. I know Afghanistan is not like Africa, but we speak about women. We can take as an example. I'm a woman who trusts in sport. I play sport, and I think sport is strictly connected with education and with socialization. While I was in Afghanistan,
Hi, Erica. Unfortunately, you're breaking too much. Your line is breaking. We cannot get you. Maybe while the IT team can work on it.
Thinking how improve the
Erica, can you hear me?
Of these women. They were suffering for.
I can't hear.
Violence. They were alone. And really.
Erica?
Yeah, I hear you. Perfect. Can you hear me?
Yeah, unfortunately, your line is breaking.
Yeah.
So maybe while the IT team will have a look.
I don't know why.
Yeah, let's see the IT team, have a look at it. And then let's take Christina, and then we'll get back to you.
Okay, fine.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay, fine with me.
Christina comes from the Lebanese NGO Fighters for Peace. It's an organization that unites former combatants, including women, from different political and sectarian backgrounds to promote peace and reconciliation. Today, she will share with us her experience with female former combatants from the Lebanese civil war, the challenges in the reintegration process, and the opportunity in engaging in peace building and reconciliation today, at the heart of the thematic at hand. Christina, can you please take the floor.
Yes, thank you very much, Mr. Badreddine, and I'm very honored to be on this panel today. Yeah, I would briefly somehow complement the views that have been raised by my co-panelists in terms of the different roles that women can play in post-war societies as peace builders and peacemakers. I would like to start with a little bit of a provocative view that women are not automatically peace lovers because of their gender, and women are not always only victims. They can also be perpetrators. So that means that women can have agency and many, many different forms and fields, even as fighters, even as combatants. So this is what we have been faced with, and we're working with ex-combatants, both men and women in Lebanon. So I know the geographic context is different from the African continent. Lebanon is located in the Middle East. It's not even North Africa as Morocco. But nevertheless, I think we can share different experiences and learn from each other, especially when we talk about societies that had undergone civil wars or civil conflicts, and how to get out of it and how to create peace in such societies. Because also, unfortunately, on the African continent, there are many, many civil conflicts and civil wars. So I think in a way or another, these conflicts can be compared to each other, and we can learn from each other in terms of peace building. So yes, I truly believe that women can have different agencies and can play active roles in war as much as in peace. And, you know, in Lebanon, we had a civil war from 1975 to 1990, but even after the official end of the war, there have been many cycles of violence and many conflicts. And I think one of the reasons why there have been ongoing violence and conflicts in this country is because the ex-combatants, both men and women, have not been actively involved in the peace process. Lebanon is quite particular. I will not speak now about the political situation, and I will not speak much about the fact that many of those war leaders are now holding key political positions, which is one of the big problems that post-war Lebanon is facing right now. I would like to briefly talk about our work with female ex-combatants and how they transformed from being you know, fighters for a war to fighters for peace. So when we first reached out to female combatants, it was a very difficult process of trust building and a lengthy process of trust building. And I have not found a viable explanation why the female combatants, it was harder to build trust between each other than for their male counterparts. Maybe it's because male combatants, they can brag more about their roles they played in a war. They can brag more about their role of having been a war hero, much more than women. So women, we realized when we started to reach out to different women from different political backgrounds, from different militias, and we tried to bring them together, it took time for them to sit together and to engage in a dialogue. So, for example, Beirut was during the war divided between East and West Beirut, between a predominantly Muslim part and a predominantly Christian part. And we asked one side of the ex-combatants to come to the other side of Beirut. They refused, and vice versa. So we first had to find like a more neutral ground for those women to meet. So we met outside of Beirut to first couple of workshops. And after a few meetings, we managed to bring them together for a full 3 days weekend, where we engaged them in a true reflection process or self-reflection process, which was very, very important. And I just wanted to highlight one little activity that we did. We had a gender specialist from a university, and she simply asked these women who had been all combatants, and some of them had been former enemies. She asked them, well, what are the attributes that you would associate women with? You know, what are female characteristics? So they would come up, well, women are soft, they have to be beautiful and kind, and they are caring, and they are mothers and bearers of life. And all these stereotypical things that you attribute to women, especially in conservative or patriarchal societies. But the thing was that in this room, in this workshop room, it was full of former female combatants, and they had all been in the battlefields. They had, you know, wearing boots and military outfits. They had been carrying guns. They had received military training, but they would not associate all of these things as female characteristics. So I said, well, wait a minute, you're saying women are kind and peaceful and so on, but what about you, your own past as being ex-combatants and so on, and you know, having sacrificed a lot and even risked your life. And I could formally hear it click and reconnect with memories that they had really pushed away and buried really far. And they said, yes, you're right. We were once heroes, we were equal to men, we were courageous, and so on and so on. So it was the first time where they really reconnected with this part of their lives. And this is what I then realized, that women, female combatants, actually suffer from a double stigmatization. So in post-war Lebanon, for male and female combatants, it was very hard to come out as combatants in public, because they were the ones, obviously, who had destroyed the country. And but for women, it was even much harder. It was double as hard as for their male counterparts to come out in public and to tell to the public or to youth in schools, well, yes, I was a fighter. I fought in this civil war. And it's still until now, when female combatants speak, for example, in front of a school class, that they say, yes, I was a fighter. I'm a woman, but I was a fighter. I was carrying a gun. I engaged in combat. That, you know, you can even see the eyes pop from the students, and you see how these women break with the gender norms and raise lots of questions within those students. So yes, we realized that women suffer from this double stigmatization, because it's not easy to say, yes, I was a combatant, but it's even more difficult to say I'm a woman, but I was a combatant, because this role does not correspond to the gender norms in this society, especially in an Arab, you know, rather patriarchal society. So that's one of the reasons why they had pushed away these memories and this part of their lives. So it was very, very important, this process, that these women could reconnect with their personal past and make peace with this part of their lives. Because if you're not at peace with yourself first, how can you then reach out to the public and say, okay, I left war behind, I learned my lesson, I know that war has, you know, was very, very bad for this society, and war only leads to destruction and to death and to harm. And now I want to engage for peace, and I want to engage in reconciliation process, because I learned that war does only harm, and it does not lead our country and our society to anything good. So it was very, very important for them to have this inner reflection process and this inner transformation process, and to come to peace with their own personal past first, before then standing in front of a public, for example, before standing in front of a school class and talking about war, and to tell students how bad war is, and hoping that youth will not go for this path of violence, but choose a different path of non-violence and reconciliation. And this was like the basis, basically. And then later on, through our organization, we you know, supported women to gain new leadership roles. Because I think that's also another thing, another aspect that's often overlooked, that ex-combatants, both male and female ex-combatants, they have good traits, they can have good, you know, skills. They were leaders in a war, and they had their ideals, and they were ready to sacrifice even their life, but they chose the wrong way. They chose violence. So what if you know, manage to transform, to support the transformation process of ex-combatants, both male and female, and use these leadership roles, use this idealism, and use this, you know, sacrifice that they would give for society, but for something positive, for peace, for reconciliation, for bridge building. So this is what we're working in Fighters for Peace, to support these transformation processes, to provide capacity building for ex-combatants so that they can find, you know, new identities, but become positive role models in society and engage for peace and for bridge building and for reconciliation. So men can play this role and women can play this role as well. So that's where I'm going back to the agency. Women can play, you know, an active agency in many, many different roles and many different levels, both in war and in peace. Thank you.
Thank you, Christina, for this very insightful contribution, very practical one. You know, the challenges that you've been describing and the way of going around them, trying to understand the root aspects, the psychology of how these female combatants have received their role and how it impacts somehow. I mean, how your work has been instrumental, not only in terms of reinsertion, but also it trickles down to reconciliation, to social cohesion, and maybe on lessons learned on how, you know, such cases need to be approached a bit probably in time to facilitate that type of reinsertion. With this, let's try and get back to Erica for 5 more minutes, if we are having her back now. She was talking about...
Okay, I'm here. If you cannot hear me, I can, I mean, I speak with that camera.
We can see you fine, please go ahead.
Ah, okay, so very quickly, just 5 minutes. I was just starting speaking about Afghanistan. While I was in Afghanistan, I was deployed in TAC West as a gender advisor to the command, and I started thinking on how improve the life of these Afghan women victims of violence alone. And I developed a project, a sport project with an Afghan woman. And in particular, we created a team of volleyball, a volleyball team, 10 young Afghan women. And we were teaching them to play volleyball into the military base. I trust a lot in sport, as I told you before. I think sport is a message of peace. I was speaking with a team of nuns here in Italy. They play football. And one of these women told me that sport and peace are strictly connected. And I trust, because if you have this value, the value of the sport is a value of education, of you need to take care of your enemy also, that is playing in front of you. And I mean, sport convey good value. And a mother that can convey this kind of value to his children, to her children, I think that it is something related, of course, with peace. And going back to the first intervention, I think that sport is strictly related in preparing the social environment for peace socialization. And that's, I finished my intervention and I'm open to any questions.
Thank you. Erica, I'm glad to have you back.
Yeah.
your opening remarks about the value of partnerships, about how different organizations can, you know, network and share their competitive advantages. You know, for instance, for the very particular case of the role of women in preventing radicalization and so on, this is unique. You know, kind of cooperation that can come through partnerships. And that's also thanks for the, you know, for bringing practical examples, such as sports and trust, yeah. and how, you know, everything can contribute to bring that trust, which is needed in coping with those challenges. With this, like you said, we're gonna probably open the floor for questions, and then we'll take them in the same order we have begun our panel. I can see already two main questions. First one is, while women are the main civilian victims of conflicts, they are often powerless to prevent them, excluded from negotiations when it comes to their resolution, and confined to a marginal role in the post-conflict reconstruction and reconciliation efforts. And the question is, how can we cope with this situation when international domestic policies are not harmonized? The second question is, you know, how has the Women, Peace and Security agenda impacted the mandates of current multidimensional resolutions in terms of gender in Africa? Let's probably just give a floor to Dr. Mamphela, if she has any insights on this, and then we'll carry on. Dr. Mamphela, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. I really enjoyed the inputs from my fellow panelists and the various perspectives that they bring. The point is not to deny that women can and do participate in conflicts, and as formal or informal. But what I think, even these questions about women are the main civilian victims, not because they are powerless, but because the structures of our societies across the globe, and in particular in those patriarchal societies, disempowers women. And in my country, I can tell you that this victimhood includes women who are carrying guns. They get raped by their fellow soldiers. And so the question for us really is, how do we, and that's why I liked what Federico was talking about, the training of the military has to include this mindset shift as well. But there have to be incentives in society to valorize power and machoism, but to incentivize and encourage people, because I believe, quite frankly, that every human being has got the feminine within them. That's what our ancient cultures tell us. And so if we can nurture this, the feminine in all of us, we will and can be able to work together. And this is where I think the role of the UN peace process has to be not just about ending wars and signing settlements, without dealing with the wounds, whether it's the wounds of women who now have got this double jeopardy of being fighters and also victims, but to heal the nation from the fractures that every conflict brings to society. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Dr. Mamphela, for this usual bright insights. And with this, colleagues, you'll have a couple of minutes each to go about the questions. Federico?
Yes, I think on the first question, the question was, how do we cope with this? And I would say, how do we change this rather than how do we cope with this? And because we should not cope with it, because that means accepting it. And I think some of the steps that we have identified, you, Badreddine, mentioned the lack of women mediators. Not the lack that they don't exist, but they're just not as used as they should be. Incentives, as Dr. Mamphela was saying, but also accountability. When violence is taken against women, when whether within or outside armed forces, and then work to change societal norms. Very often we see in countries that have experienced conflict, right after conflicts, very high level of domestic violence, because that violence that men used to employ in conflict then turns often in the home. So be prepared for this. And by the way, these levels are also very high in countries that have not experienced conflict in decades. So it's not the only indicator. So that's what, it is a complex agenda, but I think that there are a number of steps we can take. On the second question, how the WPS agenda has influenced mandates. I was working for MONUC, the UN mission in Congo, when finally the world became aware that women were raped in their tens of thousands in Congo, which came as a surprise to me. I was in the Human Rights Division, and we had been documenting those cases for a long time. But that led, that awareness led to an increasing use of increasingly precise language on gender-based sexual violence, and increasing responsibility for UN peacekeeping mission to participate in the prevention and resolution of such violence. That is, I think, the role we want to continue taking, rather than generic statement, make very clear commitments. Thank you.
Thank you, Federico. Erika, would you have something to say? I think Erika is not hearing us. Christina, the floor is yours for final remarks.
No, I think Erika's microphone was closed.
Okay.
Yeah, well, I can briefly, well, my background maybe is a bit different. I work as a practitioner on the grassroots level, and our big question is always, how do we transfer, from the grassroots to the from down to up? How can we, generate a tickle up effect, not a tickle down effect? But I truly believe that social change always takes place on the grassroots level and not on the upper level. The upper level can support such changes, but true social change can be achieved only on the grassroots level. So what we're doing is we're promoting the women, peace and security agenda in education and women rights groups and women activist groups, and within our ex-combatants as well, so that they know that such an agenda actually exists, and that it's important, and it has a certain vision that we should follow, because it is very relevant. So this is what I can say, but the problem continues, like how to reach those who are in power and how to promote such agendas. There is a national action plan in Lebanon for women, peace and security agenda, but is it really implemented? What kind of content does it have? Is it effective or not? These are all questions that still need to be answered.
Thank you so much, Christina. Maybe Erika will give you back the floor if you're willing to take it. Your micro is muted, Erika.
Yeah, sorry. I was just thinking about my experience in Afghanistan, that while I was trying to develop this project with Firoza. She was a great woman because she had married a former Taliban, and through her love, and not only love, but her strongness, that her husband was with her. She had an NGO working with her, with women, former Taliban. So that was very weird and a great example and a model. But what I want to say is that speaking with Firoza, she told me that sometimes in this patriarchal organization, it was so difficult to change the life of women, because changing life sometimes means for these women having no more husband, no more family, and staying alone. So we need to be, of course, to pay attention at the cultural environment we are working with.
Thank you, Erica. Thank you all for those very insightful comments. Just a word before we wrap up and close on the impact of the Women, Peace and Security agenda. It has been tremendous on their mandates in the United Nations, and not only for the peacekeeping operations. Same thing in the special political missions, and same thing in with UN country teams around the world. There is not a single strategy that has not been impacted since since it gets into the game. I can tell you, I've been in many of those missions to work on protection of civilian strategies, to work conflict related sexual prevention strategies, also on child protection, on DDR, security sector reform, also strategies, and how they, how in the engagement with host authorities and so on. And I can tell you the indicators that have been put in place in all of these mandates, the monitoring and evaluation, the adaptation of human resources also to those kind of challenges. It has been tremendous. Well, now it's a work in progress. Maybe not as fast as we will all like to have it, and not commensurate with the challenges, but certainly there's a work in progress there. With this, let me take the last minute to really thank the panelists for taking the time to share their experiences and insights, and to thank the Policy Center for the New South for the opportunity to share collectively on such a very sensitive and delicate matter of great importance to peace and security in general, and to the mainstreaming of the gender dimension in conflict and post-conflict and our collective engagements. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you all.
Thank you, everyone.
Good day.
Bye.
Bye-bye.